Long ago, in the heart of the Akan region of Ghana, there lived a peaceful village called Nkwanta. The village sat nestled between rolling hills covered in palm trees and cocoa farms, where the morning mist danced with the smoke from cooking fires. The people of Nkwanta were known throughout the region for their honesty, hard work, and deep respect for their ancestors. One scorching afternoon, when the harmattan winds carried dust from the Sahara, a stranger arrived in Nkwanta. He called himself Kojo the Magnificent, and he claimed to possess powers given to him directly by the gods. Kojo was a tall man with piercing eyes and a voice that could boom across the entire village square. He wore flowing white robes embroidered with golden threads that caught the sunlight, and around his neck hung multiple amulets that clinked together as he walked. "People of Nkwanta," Kojo announced, his voice carrying over the murmur of the evening market. "I have traveled from the great city of Kumasi, where the Asantehene himself has witnessed my miraculous powers. I have come to bring healing to your village, to cure your sick, and to bring prosperity to your homes." The villagers gathered around this mysterious figure, drawn by his confident manner and expensive clothing. In recent months, a strange illness had befallen several members of their community. Children who couldn't keep food down, elders whose joints ached beyond the normal pains of age, and mothers whose newborns cried incessantly through the night. Among the crowd that day was a Kojua, a young mother whose baby, Kwame, had been sick for 3 weeks. Little Kwame had once been a plump, happy child who gurgled with laughter and reached for his mother's face with tiny, grasping fingers. But now, he lay listless in her arms, his small body burning with fever, his eyes dull and unfocused. Akojua had tried everything the village healer, old Nana Ya, had suggested. She had brewed bitter teas from neem leaves, rubbed shea butter mixed with herbs on Kwame's chest, and even made offerings to the river spirits. Nothing seemed to help, and each day her son grew weaker. When she heard Kojo's promises, hope flickered in her heart like a flame in the wind. She pushed through the crowd, clutching Kwame close to her chest, his small head resting against her shoulder. "Please, sir," she called out, her voice trembling with desperation. "My baby is very sick. The village healer has tried everything, but nothing works. Can you really heal him?" Kojo's eyes locked onto Akojua, and he saw immediately what she represented, a mother's desperation, the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his supposed powers to the entire village. He smiled broadly, his white teeth gleaming in the fading sunlight. "Bring the child to me, sister," he said, his voice suddenly gentle and filled with false compassion. "The spirits have whispered to me of this illness. I have the power to cast out the evil that plagues your son." From beneath the great baobab tree that had stood in the village center for over 200 years, Nana Kwaku watched the proceedings with growing unease. At 78 years old, he had served as the village chief for 30 years and had seen many traveling healers come and go. There was something about this Kojo that troubled him deeply. Nana Kwaku had learned long ago that true healing came from patience, wisdom, and understanding, not from grand gestures and promises of instant miracles. He remembered his own grandmother, who had been a renowned healer, telling him, "My child, those who boast loudest about their powers often possess the least. True medicine works quietly, like the roots of a tree growing strong beneath the earth." As he watched Kojo prepare for his healing ceremony, Nana Kwaka noticed several troubling details. The man's hands, though adorned with rings, bore no calluses or stains from handling medicinal herbs. His eyes darted nervously when he thought no one was looking, and most telling of all, he kept glancing toward the village entrance as if planning his escape route. But the crowd was growing excited, and hope was spreading through the gathering like wildfire. Even some of the village's most sensible adults were nodding eagerly at Kojo's promises. Nana Kwaka knew he had to be careful. If he spoke out too soon, the desperate villagers might turn against him. Instead, he decided to watch and wait, gathering evidence of the truth. As darkness fell over Nkwanta, Kojo arranged for a grand ceremony in the village square. Torches were lit in a large circle, creating dancing shadows that made everything seem mysterious and otherworldly. The entire village gathered, men, women, children, and elders, all drawn by the promise of witnessing a miracle. Kojo had spent the hours before the ceremony carefully observing little Kwame. He noticed that the baby seemed slightly more alert in the evening hours, a common pattern for children with certain fevers. He also overheard Akojo telling another mother that Kwame had managed to keep down some breast milk earlier that day, the first time in a week. "Behold," Kojo announced dramatically, raising his arms to the star-filled sky. "Tonight, the spirits will work through me to heal this child. But first, I must have complete silence and absolute faith from everyone present. Any doubt, any whisper of disbelief will anger the spirits and make my work impossible." This was a clever trick Kojo had learned in his travels. By demanding silence and faith, he protected himself from questions and could blame any failure on the people's lack of belief. He placed his hands over baby Kwame, who lay on a cloth in the center of the circle. Kojo began to chant in what he claimed was an ancient language, though Nana Kwaku recognized it as nonsensical gibberish mixed with a few words of Chui spoken backward. Then, as if by magic, little Kwame opened his eyes more widely than he had in days. He even made a small sound that wasn't crying. The crowd gasped in amazement, and several people began to weep with joy. "The spirits have heard our prayers," Kojo shouted triumphantly. "The evil has been cast out. Your son will recover." Akojo cried with relief and gratitude, falling to her knees before Kojo. Other villagers began bringing forward their own sick family members, pressing coins and gifts into Kojo's hands. But the celebration was short-lived. By the next morning, little Kwame's fever had returned with a vengeance. His brief moment of alertness had been nothing more than the natural fluctuation of his illness, something any experienced healer would have recognized. Akojo was devastated. She had spent her family's entire savings, money they had been saving to buy seeds for the next planting season, to pay Kojo for his miracle. Now, not only was her baby still sick, but her family faced potential hunger in the months ahead. When she approached Kojo to ask why the healing hadn't lasted, he dismissed her concerns with practiced ease. "The evil spirits are strong in this child," he said coldly. "You must have done something to displease them. Perhaps you didn't have enough faith, or maybe someone in your family has committed a sin that blocks the healing." This cruel response broke Akojo's heart. Not only had she lost her money, but now she was being blamed for her child's continued suffering. She returned to her hut in shame, wondering what she had done wrong. Meanwhile, word of the miracle had spread to neighboring villages, and more desperate people began arriving in Quanta, seeking Kojo's help. He set up an elaborate tent decorated with cowrie shells and colorful fabrics, and began charging increasingly high fees for his services. Over the following weeks, Kojo's methods became more elaborate and expensive. He claimed that different illnesses required different ceremonies, each with its own fee structure. For a sick goat, he charged 2 chickens and a bag of yams. For an ailing elder, he demanded a full month's worth of farm produce. For serious conditions like Kwame's, he required payment equivalent to several months of a family's income. His tricks were many and varied. For people with temporary ailments that would improve naturally, he timed his healings to coincide with their recovery. For chronic conditions, he prescribed ongoing spiritual maintenance that required regular payments. When his treatments failed, he always found someone or something else to blame: insufficient faith, family curses, or the interference of jealous spirits. Young Kofi, a teenager who had been born with a withered arm, became one of Kojo's most tragic victims. Kofi's parents, desperate to see their son whole, sold their best farmland to pay for an elaborate healing ceremony. Kojo promised that with enough faith and payment, their son's arm would grow strong and straight. The ceremony was spectacular: drums, dancing, incense, and dramatic pronouncements. But when morning came, Kofi's arm remained unchanged. His parents were left landless and heartbroken, while Kofi himself was crushed by the realization that he had been the cause of his family's ruin. Similar stories began to multiply throughout the village. Families went hungry because they had traded their food stores for useless ceremonies. Children couldn't attend school because their parents had spent school fees on fake healings. The social fabric of Nkwanta began to fray as resources dwindled and hope turned to desperation. Among the villagers was a sharp-eyed boy named Ya, only 12 years old, but possessed of uncommon intelligence and curiosity. Unlike the adults, who were blinded by their desperate need to believe, Ya began to notice inconsistencies in Kojo's stories and methods. Ya had always been the kind of child who asked difficult questions and noticed details others missed. His grandmother often said he had old eyes in a young face, meaning he saw through deceptions that fooled even his elders. One evening, while Kojo thought everyone had gone home, Ya crept close to the healer's tent. Through a gap in the fabric, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Kojo was practicing his dramatic healing gestures in front of a mirror, experimenting with different voices and expressions like an actor preparing for a performance. But more damning still, Ya overheard Kojo talking to himself about his plans. "These simple village people are so easy to fool," Kojo muttered as he counted his coins. "A few more weeks here, and I'll have enough money to live comfortably in Accra for months. Then I'll find another village full of desperate fools." Ya's young heart filled with righteous anger. He thought of baby Kwame, still sick despite his mother's sacrifice. He thought of Kofi's family, now landless and destitute. He thought of all the suffering Kojo had caused with his lies and greed. The boy knew he had to act, but he also knew that simply telling the adults what he had seen might not be enough. They wanted so desperately to believe in Kojo's powers that they might dismiss a child's word. Ya needed proof that no one could deny. The next morning, Ya approached Nana Kwaku beneath the ancient baobab tree. The old chief had been waiting for such a moment, knowing that the truth would eventually surface. "Nana," Ya said respectfully, using the term of address for an elder, "I have something important to tell you about Kojo the Magnificent." Nana Kwaku listened carefully as Ya recounted everything he had seen and heard. The old man's face grew grave, but he was not surprised. He had suspected Kojo's deception from the beginning, but had needed evidence before he could act. "My child," Nana Kwaku said when Ya finished speaking, "you have done well to bring this to me. But we must be very careful how we proceed. People who are desperate to believe will often attack those who try to show them the truth. We need a plan that will reveal Kojo's deception in a way that cannot be denied or dismissed." Together, the wise elder and the clever boy devised a strategy. They would create a situation where Kojo would be forced to demonstrate his powers under conditions that would expose his fraud. But they needed help from someone Kojo had wronged, someone whose testimony would carry weight with the community. They decided to approach Akojua. Her baby remained sick despite Kojo's miracle, and she had begun to have doubts about the healer's authenticity. More importantly, as Kwame's mother, her word would carry special weight in the community. When Nana Kwaku and Ya approached Akojua, they found her in a state of quiet despair. Little Kwame had grown weaker despite Kojo's supposed miracle, and the family's resources were completely exhausted. Akojua's husband, Kwadwo, had been forced to seek work in a distant town, leaving her alone with their sick child. "Sister Akojua," Nana Kwaku said gently, "we need to speak with you about Kojo and what really happened to your son." At first, Akojua resisted their words. Accepting that Kojo was a fraud would mean admitting that she had wasted her family's savings and that her baby's suffering had been for nothing. The psychological pain of this realization was almost unbearable. But as he recounted what he had witnessed, and Nana Kwaku shared his own observations, the truth became undeniable. Akojua remembered how Kojo had blamed her when the healing failed, how he had shown no real compassion for her suffering, and how he had immediately demanded more money for additional treatments. "I wanted so desperately to believe," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I would have done anything to save my child. But he was never trying to heal Kwame at all, was he? He was just using my love for my son to steal from us." The realization was heartbreaking, but it also kindled a fierce anger in Akojua's heart. She thought of all the other families Kojo had deceived, all the children who remained sick while their parents impoverished themselves chasing false hope. "What can we do?" she asked. "How can we stop him?" Nana Kwaku explained their plan. The next day, Kojo had announced he would perform his greatest miracle yet, healing the entire village of all ailments in a single ceremony. This would be the perfect opportunity to expose his deception in front of everyone. Word of Kojo's planned great healing ceremony spread throughout Nkwanta and the surrounding villages. He claimed that he had received a vision from the ancestors themselves, instructing him to heal everyone in the community during a single, powerful ritual. The price, he announced, would be substantial. Every family would need to contribute according to their means, but the results would be permanent and complete. Many villagers were excited by this promise, seeing it as their chance for total restoration. But others began to express doubts. How could one man heal an entire village? Why did the ceremony require everyone to pay again, even those who had already received his healing? Families gathered around their evening fires, debating whether to participate. The discussion grew heated in many households, with some members convinced of Kojo's power while others questioned his motives. In her small hut, Akojua spent the night holding little Kwame, who seemed to grow frilier with each passing hour. She thought about the conversation with Nana Kwaku and Ya, and about the choice that lay before her. Tomorrow, she would either help expose the man who had deceived her community, or remain silent and watch as more families fell victim to his lies. Meanwhile, Kojo prepared for what he planned to be his final performance in Kwana. He had accumulated enough wealth from the village to live comfortably for many months. After tomorrow's ceremony, he would quietly slip away during the night, leaving the villagers to discover gradually that their healing was as false as all the others. But Kojo had no idea that his deception was about to be exposed in the most dramatic way possible. The morning of the great ceremony dawned clear and bright. By noon, hundreds of people had gathered in Kwanta's central square. Not just villagers, but people from neighboring communities who had heard of Kojo's promised miracle. Kojo appeared in his most elaborate costume yet, flowing robes of white and gold, multiple necklaces of cowrie shells and colored beads, and a towering headdress decorated with feathers and carved figures. He moved through the crowd like a king, accepting offerings and making grand pronouncements about the power that would soon be unleashed. The ceremony began with drums and dancing, building to a fever pitch of excitement. Kojo called upon spirits and ancestors, demanding that all illness, all suffering, all misfortune be banished from the community forever. But then, at the moment of his greatest theatricality, Nana Kwaku stepped forward from the crowd. "Wait," the old chief called out, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "Before we proceed, I have a question for our great healer." The crowd turned to look at their respected elder, surprised by his interruption. Kojo's face flickered with annoyance, but he couldn't refuse to answer the village chief publicly. "Speak, old man," Kojo said with forced courtesy. "If your powers are truly from the ancestors," Nana Kwaku said slowly, "then surely you can tell us something about this village that only the spirits would know. Can you tell us the name of the great chief who founded Nkwanta and where he came from?" This was a trap that Nana Kwaku had carefully prepared. Every true healer or spiritual leader in the region would know the founding story of Nkwanta. It was part of the oral tradition passed down through generations. But Kojo, who had never been to this area before and had no real spiritual training, knew nothing of the village's history. Kojo's mind raced as he tried to think of a response. He could see suspicion beginning to bloom in some faces in the crowd. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning's coolness. The spirits speak in mysterious ways," he said, attempting to deflect the question. "They have not chosen to reveal such details to me, for they're focused on healing, not on ancient history." But Nana Kwaku was relentless. "How strange," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent square. "Because just last week, you told the market women that the ancestors had spoken to you of this village's history. You claimed they told you that Nkwanta was blessed with special spiritual energy because of its founding. Were you lying then, or are you lying now?" The crowd began to murmur with unease. Several people remembered Kojo making such claims, and his inability to answer simple questions about their village's history was troubling. Young-ya chose this moment to step forward. "I have something to say about Kojo the Magnificent," he announced in his clear, young voice. "A child should not interrupt such sacred proceedings," Kojo said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. But Nana Kwaku gestured for Ya to continue. "In our tradition, truth can come from any mouth, young or old. Speak, my child." Ya's voice rang out clear and strong as he recounted exactly what he had witnessed. Kojo practicing his performance in front of a mirror, counting money while boasting about deceiving simple village people, and planning his escape to the city. "I saw him with my own eyes," Ya declared. "He was laughing about how easy it was to fool us. He called us desperate fools and said he would take our money and run away to live comfortably in Accra." The crowd's murmur grew louder and more angry. But Kojo, experienced in deception, tried one more desperate ploy. "You would believe the word of a child over a chosen vessel of the spirits?" he demanded. "This boy has obviously been sent by evil forces to disrupt the great healing. His lies are meant to prevent your blessing." But then Akojua stepped forward, carrying little Kwame in her arms. The sight of the sick child, still weak and fevering despite Kojo's supposed miracle, spoke louder than any words. "Look at my son," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "This man claimed to heal him. I gave him everything we had, our savings, our seed money, our hope. But my baby is still sick. If Kojo truly has the power to heal, why does my child still suffer?" She turned to face the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to believe so desperately that I ignored what my heart knew to be true. This man is not a healer. He is a thief who steals from our desperation and grows rich from our pain." As Akojua's words sank in, other victims began to speak up. Kofi's father stepped forward to tell how his family had lost their land chasing false promises. An elderly woman spoke of selling her gold jewelry to pay for treatments that never worked. A young father described watching his daughter grow weaker while Kojo collected payment after payment for ceremonies that accomplished nothing. The crowd's mood shifted dramatically from hope to anger to profound sadness. People began to realize how many resources had been wasted, how much suffering could have been prevented if they had not been blinded by their desperate desire to believe. Kojo, seeing his deception fully exposed, tried to slip away toward the edge of the crowd. But the villagers surrounded him, demanding the return of their money and goods. "You have stolen from the sick," one man shouted. "You have taken food from children's mouths. You made us believe our suffering was our fault when your treatments failed," cried a woman whose baby had died while she spent her last coins on Kojo's useless ceremonies. But Nana Kwaku raised his hand for silence. "My people," he said, "we must not let our anger make us behave like him. We are better than that." Under Nana Kwaku's wise leadership, the villagers decided on a just punishment for Kojo. He would return every penny he had taken from the community, including the value of goods and livestock he had received as payment. The money and resources would be redistributed to the families he had defrauded, with priority given to those who had suffered the most. Kojo's elaborate tent was dismantled, and his expensive belongings were distributed among his victims. His fine robes, golden ornaments, and carved amulets were revealed to be cheap imitations, props designed to create an impression of wealth and power. But the real healing in Quanta began not with the recovery of stolen goods, but with the community's commitment to supporting each other authentically. Families who had been isolated in their shame and desperation came together to share resources and comfort. Old Nana Ya, the village's traditional healer who had been pushed aside by Kojo's arrival, was welcomed back with deep respect and apologies. She immediately began treating little Kwame and the other sick children with genuine herbal medicines and careful, patient care based on generations of accumulated knowledge. "True healing," she told the gathered families, "comes slowly and with effort. It requires understanding, patience, and genuine care, not dramatic promises and expensive ceremonies." Under Nana Ya's careful treatment, little Kwame began to show real improvement. It took weeks, not the instant miracle Kojo had promised. But gradually the baby's fever broke, his appetite returned, and his bright eyes began to focus on his mother's face with renewed alertness. Akojo wept with gratitude, but this time her tears were of genuine joy rather than desperate hope. She had learned a painful but valuable lesson about the difference between authentic healing and theatrical deception. Other families also began to recover, both physically and financially. The returned resources helped them replant their fields, restock their livestock, and restore their economic stability. But more importantly, they had learned to be more discerning about extraordinary claims and to value the traditional wisdom that had sustained their community for generations. Young Ya was celebrated throughout the village for his courage in speaking truth to power. Nana Kwaku took him under his wing, recognizing in the boy the makings of a future leader who would value honesty and wisdom over flashy promises. The village established new traditions to protect themselves from future deception. They created a council of elders who would evaluate any stranger claiming supernatural powers, and they instituted systems for supporting families facing medical crises without forcing them to seek desperate solutions from unproven sources. As months passed, the story of Kojo the Magnificent became a cautionary tale told throughout the region. But it was not told with bitterness or shame, but rather as a lesson about the importance of community, the value of traditional wisdom, and the danger of letting desperation override good judgment. Nana Kwaku often reflected on the experience during his evening walks around the village. "We were so eager for a miracle," he would tell visitors, "that we forgot miracles often come disguised as ordinary persistence, traditional knowledge, and community care." The village prospered in ways that went beyond physical healing. Families grew closer as they worked together to recover from their losses. Young people developed a deeper appreciation for their elders' wisdom. The community became more self-reliant and less susceptible to exploitation by outsiders, promising easy solutions to complex problems. Akojoa became an advocate for other mothers facing medical crises with their children. She would visit families in similar situations, sharing her story and helping them access genuine medical care while avoiding the trap of false promises. Her experience, though painful, had transformed her into a source of strength and wisdom for others. Ya grew up to become a teacher and eventually a respected leader in his own right. He never forgot the lesson that truth-telling, even when difficult, was one of the most important services one person could provide to their community. 2 years after his expulsion from Quanta, Kojo returned to the village. But he came not as the magnificent healer in flowing robes, but as a humbled man in simple, worn clothing. His time in the city had not gone well. Without the easy money from deceiving villagers, he had struggled to survive and had eventually lost everything. Word of his deception had spread throughout the region, making it impossible for him to practice his fraudulent healing in other communities. He had been forced to take honest work for the first time in his adult life, laboring in construction and learning what it meant to earn money through genuine effort rather than exploitation. The experience had changed him. Standing at the edge of Nkwanta, he felt the full weight of the harm he had caused, the families he had impoverished, the sick children whose treatment he had delayed with false promises, the community trust he had shattered. Nana Kwaku, now even more venerable at 80 years old, came out to meet him. The old chief studied Kojo's face carefully, seeing something different in the man's eyes, genuine remorse rather than calculated manipulation. "Why have you returned?" Nana Kwaku asked simply. "To ask forgiveness," Kojo replied, his voice barely above a whisper, "and to try to make amends, if such a thing is possible." Nana Kwaku, after consulting with the village council and the families Kojo had wronged, made a decision that surprised many. Rather than driving the former fraudster away, he offered him a chance at genuine redemption. "You have caused great harm," the chief told Kojo before the assembled village. "But our ancestors teach us that a person can change if their remorse is genuine and their commitment to making amends is real. You will work without payment to help rebuild what you destroyed. You will serve this community honestly, and perhaps in time, you may earn a measure of forgiveness. The path to redemption was not easy. Many villagers remained suspicious and angry, understandably reluctant to trust the man who had deceived them so cruelly. Kojo worked in the fields during planting and harvest seasons, helped repair homes damaged by storms, and assisted with community projects that required physical labor. Akojua, now the mother of a healthy, thriving Kwame and a new baby daughter, was among the slowest to forgive. But over time, she saw genuine change in Kojo's behavior. He worked tirelessly without complaint, never asked for special treatment, and showed real concern for the community's welfare.